Aloha and welcome. Welcome to Global Connections, part of the Think Tech broadcast series here. I'm your host, Carlos Juarez, and it gives me great pleasure today to welcome a guest who's going to give us a lot of good insights, information from the East-West Center. I'm joined today by Liza Ryan. I'll introduce her in just a moment, but I just want to remind our listeners that we come here on Global Connections to have opportunities to learn about links Hawaii has with the outside world and different global issues that are happening, why they're relevant for us to know. And in this case, understanding this very important organization that's here in Hawaii. It's been here for a very long time. The East-West Center, as we'll learn, established in 1960, I think, now 55 years. Very important player in terms of helping connect people with Asia. So the title of our show today is Building Bridges to Asia with the East-West Center. And let me just formally welcome you, Liza. I'm delighted that you can join us today. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, and so Global Connections is our show, of course, and couldn't be a better example of how we connect globally to the world. Tell us a little bit, maybe before we talk about this East-West Center, very, very important organization. Many know it. It's a household name in some parts of the world. But tell me a little bit about yourself. You've been there for some time now, and also just anything you want to share about your background.
Yes, well, I've been at the East-West Center now since September 2012, so about 2.5 years now, and I started as an intern there with the Democracy and Governance Initiative under Shabir Shima, who's the former director of the UNDP.
Excellent.
And after a 6-month internship there, I began working for seminars, which is one of our 4 main pillars of the East-West Center, and have continued to work with them on and off on a contract basis, and then now work with our education program.
Excellent.
But before that, I was living in the Netherlands, working with refugee problems and issues, predominantly with Moroccans, and doing a assimilation process. After about 6 years of traveling in and out of the Middle East and working with short-term teams of college students.
Excellent.
Doing humanitarian aid.
So building other bridges, and you bring that experience of obviously connecting issues and global affairs. You've got to work in all this just Spanish as well. I know we often talk in Spanish. I mean, any connection there? Did you do any travel or work in Latin America?
I studied briefly in Argentina and then in Mexico in La Universidad Autónoma.
Nice.
And worked as a translator for victims of human trafficking from Latin American countries that were in Amsterdam, in the red light district.
Excellent. So again, maybe like so many of our listeners and viewers here, I mean, we have interest in global affairs, but it's because the world is, so interconnected, and it's increasingly so. And we have to remind people outside of Hawaii sometimes that, we are a piece of this sort of global governance affairs type, and we've got important organizations. And of course, today I want to talk a little bit in detail about one of these. It is the East-West Center, and this is an institution. Some people often don't know much about it. They've heard about it, but it's a very long-standing one that has many, many key functions and roles of what it does. On one hand, it's like a think tank, it's a research center, it's an education center. It is connected, and at least certainly physically, at the University of Hawaii at Manoa campus, but it is not UH itself. And that's probably one of the first misperceptions. Nevertheless, it's had a long-standing connection. It began, and there are deep links there. Students coming into the East-West Center often are filtered into UH programs. But as we try to unravel what is this East-West Center, maybe just start from anything, basic background. It began in 1960. Tell us a little bit about the organization.
Yeah, the East-West Center was congressionally mandated in 1960, so we're coming up on our 55th anniversary here.
And it ties with Hawaii's statehood. So really right after statehood in 59, the establishment is really at the beginning.
Yeah, and we are a public nonprofit, and so we are supported by the Congress, by federal funds and not state funds. So we have a somewhat large working budget, and we bring in about $30 million a year into the Hawaii economy through different programs that we have. We also are able to host beautiful events at the location that you see behind me, the Eaton Center, that has a stunning Japanese garden right behind it that you're welcome to. I sometimes have lunch there. And very recently we just had Secretary of State John Kerry came and spoke with us on a tour that he was doing of Asia, particularly looking at his Southeast Asia initiatives. And so that's fascinating, but we are a little bit tricky to understand because we are not just a think tank, but like you said, we also do exchanges. We are a center of technical and cultural exchange for the Pacific. And something that we like to focus on at the East-West Center is really, oftentimes Hawaii is spoken of as being the most remote landmass in the world, and yet at the same time we're halfway in between Asia and the United States and the mainland. And we provide, the East-West Center provides a unique opportunity for Asians from China, Japan, sometimes North and South Korea, all the way to Southeast Asia, Polynesia, and Americans to come together and find a place where they can both be on equal footing. Because of that mixed culture, it really allows for people to kind of bring down their barriers. And we've had lots of cross-cultural marriages that have come out of the East-West Center.
Even our own President Barack Obama has connections from his mother, who had been herself an East-West Center grantee doing research, back in these early days. So it's got a special place in his own his own history.
And his sister does a lot of work, Maya Sotoro does a lot of work. She's also an adjunct at UH, but often speaks with our groups and is such a valuable asset to add to our repertoire of multicultural information and practitioners.
And certainly in this long period now, 55 years, I mean, its links into Asia and the many who've come and studied over the years, the alumni base is quite large. It is, I mean, I don't joke when I say it's a household name, but I mean it's among, the educational, academic circles and policy world. It is very well known, and it has had an impact because numerous alumni have obviously gone on to very prominent positions, heads of state, cabinet officials. So it's really been a key player in linking. You described us as this remote place, which we all know, but I like to just remind you, we are the center of the world. Everything kind of comes
it's
here.
It's all perspective, isn't it?
That's right, and so you take yourself out, and we are right there in the middle. Everyone else connects to us, but in particular, that this organization, indeed, as we'll kind of unravel the full details of it, I mean, it has a presence in Washington, D.C. Many years it's had an office there that helps to really inform and help to shape our understanding of this part of the world. That's critical. Beyond that, I think we have to see it as an example of one of the key resources here in Hawaii that helps to form, human capital, expertise, but in particular what I like to call citizen diplomacy. People who are coming together, people-to-people exchanges. We bring many people from there. We actually take the East-West Center on the road, and then I'll have you unravel some of those details. We have obviously seen the East-West Center sponsoring workshops and seminars and conferences in Asia, and that is, again, just an example of the breadth and length of it. Maybe as you just unraveled the brief outlines, founded in 1960, I mean, sometimes it's not well understood or it's misunderstood or misperceived. What are some other, like, maybe just nuggets or anecdotes that people sometimes think you are or that you're not, or I don't know, anything else you could share along those lines?
Yeah, well, I think you hit on the first one is that, we are next to the University of Hawaii at Manoa's campus. I like to say we have our own road. We're on
East-West Road,
we're on the other side. Our campus is 21 acres, and so we have a presence here, and then also, like you said, in Washington, D.C. And we are active in advocating for policy, and we write policy papers as well. The East-West Center in Washington is very much active in that. And I think it's been interesting, we maintain a regional, national, and increasingly we try to have more of a local presence as well, in that we have a lot of open events from scholars and academics that come through that are doing research on anything from deforestation in Indonesia to the effects of declining population in Japan on the workforce. And a lot of these events are open for the public to come, and they're free. Oftentimes they're between 12 and 1, what we call a brown bag seminar. I like to think of us as a public service. We oftentimes we're this big building, and people, we have a beautiful art gallery that's at the front that changes every 2 to 3 months. A new gallery opening just opened on minorities in Nepal, and it's fascinating. And Sundays we often have different events, dancers or speakers that come and talk specifically about that exhibit. And these are all open events. And so I think the main thing that I would like people to know about the East-West Center locally that they don't is that it's it's for them.
It's there, yeah. It is a public, and now the UH is, of course, our premier research institution, a state institution. It itself gets a lot of federal funding, no doubt, for research and activities. But East West Center is a federally funded, and yet very much as it grew from the beginning, established with connections there to the university. Today, and of course, like any organization, over time, it's had to kind of adjust to changes, redefine its functions, its role, the topics that it deals with, and even expand its connections. It reaches out to many other organizations in town. And across across all of Asia, of course. One of the things we'll do in a moment, I want to come to a short break, but I'd like, as we return, we're going to look specifically at some of the programs that they have. The education, the seminars, the research activities, so we can unravel a little more details about this. So what we'll do is take a short break right now for our listeners. Please come back to join us. We'll talk more on the story about this important East-West Center. Join us in just a moment.
Hi, I'm your host on Think Tech Asia, Bill Sharp. I look forward to you joining us each Monday between 4 and 5 o'clock when we film right here in our studio in downtown Honolulu. The show, Think Tech Asia, focuses on contemporary events in Asia. And by Asia, we mean anything from Hawaii, south to Australia and New Zealand, west to Pakistan, and as far north as the Russian Far East. Clearly, this is one of the most economically dynamic centers of the world, and we bring you up to date on what's going on in a whole host of countries in this very vital region. We look forward to seeing you. Aloha.
Aloha, welcome. We're back and we're live, and we're Global Connections here on the Think Tech Hawaii series. I'm your host, Carlos Juarez, joined today by Liza Ryan of the East-West Center, and we want to just deepen our conversation. East-West Center, of course, this important organization, been around now 55 years, but let's quickly take a snapshot of some of the key components. It carries out a variety of things. Research, of course, a key part. Education, another key part. A number of seminars that it does, and conference activities. So maybe just starting with some of what is on its agenda, and given its 55 years, it has evolved over time. But at the moment, what are some of the type of issues that they address?
Yeah, well, you've hit on 3 of our 4 pillars, and the last one is probably our most unique, and that's our Pacific Island development. That works. We're one of the only think tanks that focuses on Polynesia and the Pacific Islands, specifically on increasing capacity for their leadership. And recently just did some election monitoring for Fiji, and one of our fellows, Jerry, led the American delegation on that. So that's one of them. Excellent. But for the other ones, I work in education currently. So a lot of what we do in education is working with K through 12 teachers, and specifically in the program that I work in is Asia Pacific Education. So a few months ago, I was involved in a South Korea and U.S. Teacher exchange. So we brought many South Korean teachers here on behest of the Ministry of Education, and talked a lot about global competency. And then they went to the East Coast and worked with high schools and middle schools and elementary schools there. And then the teachers that they were with went to Korea to experience what teaching in Korea was like. And the importance of those programs is really to look at different models and think about, are we giving our children the skills that they need for the 21st century?
And amazing, because when the East-West Center began in 1960, Korea was a very underdeveloped country coming out of a conflict period. Today, it is the country we're looking at. What are they doing that we can learn from? In other words, they obviously have come a long way, and these opportunities, like you've described, that you've got a teacher exchange. These have a profound impact. The teachers who obviously come here, they won't return the same. They've got both better understanding not only of our education system, but maybe our culture, our society, and these things. Likewise, if you send a teacher from Hawaii that goes to South Korea, learns about what they're doing, it's not just the school, although that's important, it's just culture and things. And maybe if you can talk briefly about these kind of exchanges, I mean, how you've been able to see the impact they have on the people that participate.
Well, I think that's the unique part about the East-West Center, is that we engage in public diplomacy, which means that we are not just advocating for the United States, but trying to increase understanding of both of Americans of the Asia-Pacific region, and then of Asians and those from the Pacific of the United States. What what we identify are people that are going to be able to carry that on.
Yeah.
Not that it's just a one-to-one
Yeah,
interaction and then poof, it's
Yeah.
done.
It's not like just a boondoggle, a junket to come here, but
Yeah.
you're going to go back and you're going to have an impact beyond that. You're going to help
Yeah.
inspire others. You're going to help, infuse it into your professional world.
And that's why we
Yeah.
focus on teachers and journalists and leaders, entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
One of the programs that we have in the education program is our Pacific Island Leadership Program, and or unfortunately named PILP, and that really focuses on getting and on bringing entrepreneurs, young entrepreneurs from around the Pacific Islands to Hawaii, and they engage in a workshop for a couple of weeks, ranging to a couple of months, that really emphasizes, that gives them the skills that they need to be entrepreneurs within and change agents within
Yeah.
their own culture.
Yeah.
And that has been the amazing part. What in the education, we focus a lot on leadership, and so working with young people in their late 20s and early 30s. We had an interesting program recently that was here that worked. We had young entrepreneurs from Mongolia to a female Buddhist monk from Vietnam, and that are really engaged in social initiatives as well, and not just business, but looking at those areas. And seeing them all together, you have a woman from Sri Lanka and another woman from Malaysia, a guy from Taiwan, and a Japanese guy, and Americans, and the presentations they give together are just outstanding, because now all of a sudden, as an entrepreneur, not only do they have greater skills for themselves, but they have connections all over Asia Pacific to look at different markets and different models of how they can do, and face the issues that they have, whether that's trying to find, resources or get over bureaucratic problems in the Philippines. And I think that is what we really excel at, what the East West Center excels at, and something that's not always easy to, to talk about in a news format.
Yeah, it's not, you can't get a sound bite, or
No.
even more than that, it's often a challenge. It always is a challenge. How do you basically measure it? How do you sell it to those who are funding it, members of Congress? I mean, these are things that have an enduring impact, but they're not always immediate. But we know from, certainly anecdotally, and from those whose lives have been transformed, that it changes them in ways that are clearly positive for us, both their understanding of our world, but also even us, to better understand them and develop a sense of trust and understanding, right?
I think one of the most impacting programs that I've had the opportunity to be a part of is the Senior Journalism Seminar, which has been I wouldn't say favorite, but a personal project that our President Charles Morrison has really stood behind.
Yes.
And that focuses on bridging the gap between the United States and the Islamic world through media.
Oh, excellent.
And as we've seen with the events in Paris and Charlie Hebdo, and whether you watched that clip on the Mayor Show with Reza Aslan, there is obviously an issue that our journalists really need to have a better understanding of the Islamic world, that it's not all Saudi Arabia, but that it's also Indonesia. 2014 is the largest Islamic country in the world. And they've had more female heads of state than we've had in the United States. So these types of particularities, and for that program, we had 4 Americans, from the Huffington Post to the Washington Times, and then 8 Asian participants, journalists from Palestine, Iraq, Iran, Bangladesh, and India, Indonesia, Malaysia, and Singapore. And bringing them together, and they go on a 21-day workshop where they first meet in DC, they go to the Pentagon, they meet with area specialists, they get to meet with journalists there. They went to Boston to look at religious composition, and they came to Honolulu, and we had the amazing privilege of having our meetings at the Shangri-La at Doris Duke's, who are very, very generous in supporting our work.
Definitely.
And then they went on to Jakarta. They were supposed to head on as well to Delhi to look at the way that Modi's election has affected the religious composition and religion in the public sphere in India. Unfortunately, we were having problems with their visa problems, which a lot of people have experienced in India.
Yes.
And they went to Banda Aceh, where that had been hit so heavily by the tsunami.
Yeah.
And I think that's incredible because, you know, for our, you know, we work a lot with Pakistani media, but this particular program really focuses on helping Asian participants understand the fundamentals of the U.S., how our federalism works, what the freedom of speech and the First Amendment rights, what they mean to the American public.
No, absolutely. And I think, of course, we're speaking now in the early 21st century, thinking back of the early days of the East-West Center. Back then, we did not have the kind of communications we use today, so that when you bring these groups together, they get to meet each other before, and they get to maintain a very deep relationship after, through social media, through, you know, group activities, and then the sharing of things, you know, whether it's through blogs or just, you know, the kind of work that they do is now accessible instantly to anybody, and that makes, I think, the opportunities of these exchanges to be more enduring. It's not like just you came once and you went back home and, you know, maybe you thought about it, but now you can actually continue those communities, right? They continue to exist.
Absolutely. We always have a group Facebook page, and I think one of my favorite things is coming in and seeing something on the news, and then immediately going to my Facebook and seeing how our participants are commenting on this, and interacting back and forth on, you know, religious and media issues, whether they be, you know, in Malaysia or Singapore or in the United States. And then they also, as editors and writers for major publications, have an opportunity to, you know, when an issue comes up in another part of the world, to ask somebody who has ground level experience.
There? What are your, and also because they've known each other, it's a very, you know, there's a level of trust and understanding.
You can ask dumb questions.
Yeah, it's not like just reading somebody's post. It's like, wait a minute, we had lunch together, or we, you know, did this together, and that opens again, it makes this what we call citizen diplomacy just very more practical and relevant. And of course, these are just great examples of, again, how this institution helps connect Hawaii to the world and helps a vital role in our own foreign policy, a part of our cultural diplomacy. The education program, wide-ranging, many things that you've described, research, another key component, because it is in many ways a think tank of sorts, and the East-West Center has, you know, traditionally houses a number of research fellows who are there and who carry out a variety of things. They're experts that we turn to for, you know, insights, and they then, you know, I guess inform things. They publish quite a bit, and they help to kind of be part of the players in this area. I wonder if you, on this area of research, I mean, what might be some examples of the kind of things that are going on at a given time?
Well, currently we have a couple of Japanese fellows that are here that are looking at cybersecurity and attacks, and that was very recently. We had a talk on that issue. I have my notes here, and otherwise, what we'll be looking at in the very near future is. Well, we have something on Nepal at the moment, and then coming up February 12th through the 14th, we have our 14th International Graduate Conference. So for that one, last year we had 85 grad students that came through from 25 different countries and 34 universities. And so they're going to be showing their research, and that's open. So anybody at HPU or UH or that's interested can go on our website and attend.
And are these essentially grantees that have gotten any support, or are they simply just invited from different places?
They are invited if the paper is picked.
Yes, okay.
And then for other research that we have going on, I mean, it can really range. We do a lot in economics, environment, some in sustainability. We have a sustainability department, and then also in health, and I think health and security. And one of the pieces that has been most interesting to me recently is. For a number of different reasons, the East-West Center has been able to be quite involved in Myanmar, in Burma, as it is opened. So there was an interesting article and piece that came out that talked about the influence of Buddhist nationalistic narratives on violence within Burma, and especially at the edges of Burma where there have been conflicts with Muslim populations like the Rohingyas or the Karen and stuff. And so I'm constantly going on the website and finding information and articles that are totally astounding to me. And I think, wow, this fellow was down the hall the whole
Yes,
time,
and
and
now he's
I
having
never
this
talked to him or
amazing-
her about this incredible topic that they're working on. So it really is, if you're a student here, it's a valuable resource,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
you can also then have, for example, I'm also a graduate student at Hawaii Pacific University in our Diplomacy and Military Studies program. And several of the fellows that at the East West Center have come in for different lectures in the classes that I've had, including Denny Roy to talk about his new book about rising China. And so I think it's whatever you're interested in those areas, chances are we have new publications that are coming out.
Yeah, and so it's a steady production of research activity and similarly consultation with subject matter experts. We turn to them for insights and developments in the region. And then lastly, we reminded our listeners that you've got an office in Washington, D.C., the East West Center office. Satu Limei continues to head that office for many years now, and it's there because there's so much policy that's happening there, of course, formulated and discussed, that it allows us to have that presence there to kind of help shape it to be a resource and briefing obviously the key people. As we'll finish one more quick break and we'll come back to finish some more talk on it, I just want to remind our listeners we're joined today by Liza Ryan here from the East West Center. She's been involved in several of their different programs and just giving us a good understanding of why this important organization needs to be understood. It's building bridges to Asia. It has done so for now its 6th decade. It's astonishing. And we want to make sure we understand the impact it has. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But let's have a short break right now, and please join us in just a moment. We'll continue with more on the story.
Okay, this is Think Tech Hawaii, and it's Wednesday. Every Wednesday is Energy Wednesday here in Hawaii, the state of clean energy. 4 to 5 p.m. every Wednesday. Come and listen to us. And just to show you what I mean, I'm going to ask Sharon to tell us more.
Come and see us every Wednesday, as Jay said. And we have people like Jim Albers from HECO here and co-host Ray Starling here every Wednesday. We not only go on Olelo and OC16, but also stream live. So please come visit us, hear about the latest in clean energy.
Okay, Jim, you've been here. You got any comment on all this?
As important as energy is in all of our lives today, this is a great forum and a great format to vet those issues. So I encourage everybody to listen in and participate.
Okay, Ray, what do you think for a close?
Well, I think this is the greatest show in the energy world here in Hawaii. You can come here every week, 1 hour, and catch the latest on what's happening and hear from the people who really know what's going on, like Jim Alberts. We appreciate your coming today.
Thank you.
Ray Starling, Sharon Moriwaki, Jim Alberts, and Jay Fidel here in Hawaii, the state of clean energy. 4 to 5 p.m. Wednesday. Aloha.
Aloha.
Aloha, welcome back. We're live and we're Think Tech Hawaii. This is the show Global Connections. I'm your host, Carlos Juarez, and we're continuing a great conversation with Liza Ryan of the East West Center, a very important organization that has been now 1960, celebrating 55 years in Hawaii, having a great impact to connect the U.S. and Hawaii, of course, to primarily Asia and the Pacific. What I wanted to mention too, we've got this picture of the beautiful Imin Conference Center, and this is a piece of architecture that many are not always aware. It's basically was designed by very world-renowned I.M. Pei, a Chinese-born architect who is often called the master of modern architecture, and it represents part of the large campus of the East West Center. I'm trying to look quickly at some of my references here. Maybe you mentioned already, is it a 21-acre
21
campus?
acres.
So you've got this main conference room, you've got a main big headquarters office of a 4-story building, you've got several dormitory spaces that are quite large and also critical, because when you're bringing all these people, you've got to house them and have sort of a vibrant learning community there. Just, again, one of the pieces of our own I.M. Pei, of course, known among other things, I think the famous, actually rather funky statue that he did in the Museum of the Louvre, the glass and steel pyramid, but also part of the National Gallery of Art in Washington, numerous others, L'Enfant Plaza Hotel in DC, but here in Hawaii we have our own piece of the I.M. Pei. And as well, you said this at the outset, but this is a beautiful garden area to walk around, to enjoy. And I know over the years we've had many prominent visitors. You mentioned most recently Secretary John Kerry, I recall some years earlier, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton herself, and heads of states, many of them. And here, just as we finish a snapshot of this organization, what has been its impact? I mean, the impact is clearly far-reaching. In particular, a large base of alumni who've come through that, and not just any alumni. These are people who are key players. And so maybe a few words about who are the participants that come to these kind of programs.
Yeah. Well, currently, as of the end of fiscal year 2013, we had 62,000 alumni globally. So that's quite a large pool.
Yes.
And of them, I saw this little fact on we were putting out facts, one fact for every year that we've been open, so 55 years.
Yeah.
So over 300 former or current ambassadors have been at the East-West Center as alumni or traveling through for briefings.
Yeah.
And so that's an incredible impact
yeah.
on just, like you said, on global connections,
Yes,
on where people get to meet. So a lot, we recently had the president of Micronesia came through, and also the president of Kiribati this last year. We were supposed to have the ambassador from Sri Lanka coming next month, but he's unable to make it. So it's these kind of heads of states that we do often have come through. The Indian ambassador to the U.S., I was there for a briefing she gave. But in our programs, like I said, it can be high-level media. It's oftentimes entrepreneurs from all over the Asia Pacific and the U.S. It is sometimes teachers, depending on the education program, and then scholars and academics. And so, I mean, not the current, but the former head of the Ministry of Education in South Korea was an East-West Center alumni, and it is a posting for many academics or those that are working in education or leadership in their countries often come through here.
And so you have a mixture. Some of them are people who came through as, the high officials they are, but many others are people who might have come as young professionals, young graduate students, and who would then go on to become prominent leaders. And again, it's for those, for them, the East-West Center was an important part of their formative education. It was their connection to the U.S., to Hawaii, and they have, of course, helped to kind of keep that going, because we see, again, this notion of a household name. Well, it certainly is in many circles, whether it's Kuala Lumpur or Seoul or, places all around Asia. It's a well-known institution, probably less on the radar for many in the mainland U.S., outside of the sort of Asia world, but we need to understand that it is such a vital institution for us here.
Absolutely, and in places like Pakistan, or when we send out notices for people to apply for one of our seminars, we get many times over applications from these areas, like Malaysia or in Japan, where we have a very significant presence.
Indeed, as we finish this show, we'll make sure and send a YouTube file of it, and it'll go viral all over the place, and it'll spread the word of the East-West Center, which again, well known. The other thing, I guess I want to maybe, as we wind down our overview of this important organization, it really is, and this is the challenge, because it's the difficult to measure, difficult to explain impact that it has, and that is people-to-people diplomacy, cultural, educational exchange. I mean, those of us who obviously work in that world, we know it. It's our bread and butter, but it is one of those things that we need to be doing. We need to constantly be vigilant, because there are easy, especially these kind of things. They don't just exist on their own. You can't have like one wealthy billionaire that's just going to fund it. You need a public will, a commitment from, in some cases, the state, or in our case, the federal government. But of course, like every public organization or any kind, it has had to redefine its own role, because the limitations of our budgetary issues. There was a time in past decades when the East-West Center probably got more funding and depended more on that federal funding. Today, it has had to become more entrepreneurial itself. It has obviously reached out and now receives, like you mentioned earlier, much of its funding now will come from different foundations, from grants that are competitive grants.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think, well, one advantage is because of that long track record, the clear history and brand name that it has, it is able to continue to do well in that regard. But it is a new reality, and it means that in some ways its agenda, the issues it looks at, are in some ways shaped more by, well, what's out there, what's available. But I mean, that's just the nature of it, and those grants, many come from our U.S. government or maybe other foundations. I mean, they're looking to help inform and maybe fund different things. This often remains a challenge, and in past years, sometimes because of the cutbacks on earmarks and the overall just budget constraints in the U.S., there's been concerns that, gosh, are we going to, not let this important institution continue? Fortunately, we've been able to see that continue here in Hawaii. In past decades, it was, of course, the venerable Senator Daniel Inouye who was able to really be a stalwart to maintain that. And his passing, many felt, oh, here's one place that might not be able to continue, but it has. And yet, like everything, having to kind of find ways to do that. Perhaps you mentioned briefly like a large figure, I don't know if it was 30 million or something in kind of grants, but do you happen to know yourself what are some of the types of funding? The U.S. State Department would be obviously one obvious one. Any others?
Yeah, well, we received around 15 million in appropriated funds from Congress this last year. And then aside from, and we have about a $40 million working budget. So the rest of that comes through through foundations. So that would be Ford, sometimes Henry Luce, sometimes the State Department from different areas. We've done a lot of work on the Deepening Democracy grant for Pakistan with the U.S. Embassy in Islamabad. And they've been very, very helpful and supportive of us for the last 10 years. And so oftentimes we do cobble things together. The Roshan Amidyar's institution has helped us fund our Iranian in this last program. Like I said, Shangri-La, Doris Duke's Foundation. We're always looking for new funders and ways and that's been something that's on the East West Center leadership's plate at the moment, is thinking, how do we want to go into this next decade and the next stage of
and it's a changing reality for every kind of organization, the nature of funding, and you have to become resourceful, entrepreneurial in your own way, look for partnerships, and for some that can be frustrating. Oh, it's not what it was intended to do. Well, the world in 1960, very different from 2015.
Absolutely.
And just
no longer fighting the Cold War.
That's very true, although in some places they seem to have didn't get the memo up there in Pyongyang. But the other point is that you've got also a world in which, in 1960, relatively few think tanks. Today, it's a, massive growth industry and many small, focused, some very large and well-resourced. In the midst of all that transition, the East West Center remains, a very key piece of that. And for us here in Hawaii, and for really the link between the U.S. and Asia, this is really one of the key players, a very important one. As you've mentioned a whole range of other things, I know for many years they've also hosted an annual diplomat in residence, which is an actual U.S. Foreign Service officer who takes a break from the usual work in embassies, gets to both, in some ways maybe professional development, retrain, but also a very vital role. They help educate and explain what it is, that the State Department does. And like the East West Center, I often think of the State Department as an organization, well, we kind of know their mission to do foreign policy, but they don't have a very strong lobby group. They don't have when are they succeeding? Do we measure it by, how? And so it's often a challenge for our own State Department to define what they do and how you can measure success. Something like the East West Center, I mean, there are certain ways, there's certain deliverables and products and programs and people that are affected, but I think what has to happen is a steady, constant explanation and maybe telling the stories, the anecdotes of individuals, right? Maybe on our final minutes, what I'd like to reflect on briefly, and you've had a wealth of experience with these kind of citizen exchanges, people-to-people exchanges, the need to connect people. I mean, it transforms their lives when you bring people out of the world they know, connect them with others that are either like-minded or maybe have different ideas. And, you've now come to the East West Center with your own experience. Tell me a little bit about your own insights in terms of, you've seen things you mentioned in Europe quite some time, but working a lot with the Middle East. I mean, when you're asked this question, is the world, I mean, are we all similar or are we different? Even a region like Asia, we call it Asia, but frankly, it's really a collection of many different countries, and each of them with their own unique stories. But do you see some common threads? I mean, is there something that bringing together people from many places gonna end up with some similar results, or I don't know, what are your thoughts about that?
I mean, absolutely. First of all, I've been so privileged to be able to be there, and to live in a beautiful place like Hawaii, and to have a job that encourages you to think deeply and to reach out to people that are different than you. I feel very privileged to be there, and I think some of the similarities that come out are really that we work with groups, oftentimes professional groups. So you have journalists from all over the world that come together, and they often face the same problems. They have editors breathing down their neck. They have a hard time convincing people that the public, that they should be interested in news that, you know, that maybe isn't that interesting to them or that's deeper. And so I think when we get to that place, and oftentimes it's the bus ride in between a meeting, or it's the coffee break in between the session. That is really the point where people's opinions and their minds and hopefully, you know, it sounds a little cheesy, but their hearts get changed. When they have a chance to think back, you know, for some of our Pakistani participants, you know, America is not what I thought it to be. You know, one of our female Pakistani journalists went home and wrote what would seem to us kind of like a fluffy piece just about American women, but it was very impacting for her audience within there to say they're hardworking and they love their families and they are just trying to do the best, like we're trying to do the best. And that may seem like well, of course, you know, a totally obvious statement. But in many of these places, they only have a Hollywood image of the U.S. And so providing that for them and a real life contact. This is now their friend, somebody they have spent 24 hours on a plane with, you know, and slept on the floor of the Seoul airport. That bonds you.
That's right. No, well, again, great examples, and it is that humanizing this, you know, because we can talk in the abstract, read our textbooks and study history and things, but you both have to go to the places and you have to bring those people here.
Absolutely.
And that's what transforms lives. And I think, again, great example of this important institution doing that and doing it for many, many decades now successfully. I mean, I can tell you the many years I've known the organization that it is a great example of that, of, you know, doing what we do, doing it well, and you know, some of it requires, of course, the formalities, but then it's those more informal contacts that often will break open the opportunities and leave a lasting impact. So thanks for sharing that. And I know, as you've described, gosh, you know, the opportunity is amazing that, you know, you bring these people and then there they are down the hall, and, you know, perhaps 6 years down the road, they may be a cabinet official or an ambassador.
Absolutely.
And they're, you know, we're hoping that they will come back to, you know, keep, you know, both Liza Center and Hawaii and what it's done for them in their minds. Well, I want to thank you for this great overview and, you know, a quick snapshot of this important East-West Center, an organization established by the Congress in 1960, carries out a wide range of activities in research and education, seminars, but ultimately it's really connecting people and having an impact that will, you know, endure, that will increase mutual understanding.
Yes.
Us about the world, which we need to know, and the world about us. And again, I've seen it myself, the impact that these exchanges can have, we can't underscore enough. Well, I want to close on that and thank you again, Liza, for joining us here on Global Connections, to our listeners, and losing my little earpiece here. But very delighted to learn about this, and for you for joining us again on another issue of Global Connections, part of the Think Tech Hawaii series. Join us a bit when we're back for our next show, and aloha.